Can you imagine turning a simple balloon into a missile carrier? When a military is on a tight budget, they have to get creative. All you really need is a balloon, a gondola, and a barometric altimeter. If you attach a drone to this setup, it can act just like a cruise missile. But the difference is it only needs to use 5% of its fuel to actually hit the target. But wait, why can't modern anti-air defenses just shoot these down? First of all, these balloons have a tiny radar cross-section because they're made of canvas and synthetic materials, making them almost invisible to radar. Then there's a darker strategy. They can send cheap balloon decoys, rigged to mimic the radar signature of an actual fighter jet. By forcing the defending military to shoot down cheap balloons with multi-million-dollar interceptors, the enemy easily depletes their missile stockpiles. We actually saw this dilemma play out in real life when an F-22 Raptor fired an incredibly expensive missile instead of just using its cannon to take out that infamous Chinese spy balloon. So how do you make an attack space balloon? Well, the system is split into two primary components, the envelope and the gondola. The balloon envelope itself is an exotic military tech. It's a sack made of ultra-thin, flexible latex, polyethylene, or nylon. The choice of gas inside is purely tactical. Hydrogen is extremely cheap and widely available across, but highly flammable. Helium is safer, completely non-flammable, and used whenever the payload contains highly sensitive, expensive electronics. Regardless of the gas, the physics remain fixed. 1 cubic meter of helium or hydrogen lifts approximately 1 kilogram of payload. A crew of just a few people using a small civilian vehicle, a gas cylinder, a payload hook, and a tablet running weather tracking software can launch a strategic weapon in 15 minutes. There is no launch pad, no engine noise, and absolutely zero radar or thermal signature at the point of origin. Hanging underneath the envelope, via braided dynamo cord, is the gondola, the brain and muscle of the system. A microcontroller running open-source flight firmware constantly calculates the balloon's location against its target. A barometric altimeter and an inertial measurement unit monitor altitude, orientation, and drift. A pyrotechnic wire cutter or a servo-driven mechanical hook drops the payload when specific criteria are met, and a lightweight, cold-resistant lithium battery pack powers the entire array. Well, here is the weapon payload. You can either carry a dart missile to strike bigger targets, or an attack drone, which is literally a cruise missile. When the microcontroller reaches the pre-programmed altitude or coordinate, the release mechanism snaps. The drone drops, deploys its wings, starts its motor, and glides autonomously toward its target, dropping it from an altitude of 8 kilometers. Because the drone glided most of the way, the transit consumed a mere 5% of its onboard battery, leaving 95% of its power reserve purely for high-speed attack. So how does this help counter heavy Russian electronic warfare systems that can easily jam standard GPS-guided weapons? Well, you build a weapon that deliberately turns off its own navigation systems before it enters the jamming zone. Instead of the drone, you drop a radar-evading missile. This is the Dart, a 1.84 meters long, weighs 13 kilograms empty, and carries a graphite-based penetrating warhead weighing up to 10 kilograms. It is carried by stratospheric aerostats up to 18 kilometers into the upper atmosphere. When released, specialized servo drives stabilize its flight path across extreme high-altitude conditions. But its real genius lies in its anti-jamming architecture. Standard guidance doctrines dictate that a missile should actively navigate all the way to its target. However, that is exactly when Russian electronic warfare systems intercept, corrupt, or spoof the signal. The Dart flips this logic completely on its head. It navigates using standard GPS high up in clean, unjammed airspace. At exactly 6 kilometers altitude, the Dart completely shuts down its electronic navigation systems. It ignites its solid-fuel rocket engine and locks its flight control surfaces. Because its electronic receivers are completely powered off during the final terminal phase, enemy electronic warfare jammers have absolutely nothing to disrupt. The missile is physically untouchable by radio-electronic influence, flying on pure, unjammable ballistic momentum straight into the target. The 3.5 to 10 kilogram warhead is heavily packed with graphite-based penetrating elements meant to short out electrical grids. On impact, its mechanical or contact fuse detects the sudden physical deceleration or a direct strike. This triggers a detonator that ignites the explosive charge, blowing apart the missile casing and scattering the graphite filaments over the target area. But as stated, a balloon has no engine and no steering propellers. So how can operators ensure it flies toward a specific target instead of drifting randomly off course? Well, you don't steer the balloon through the air. You have to use advanced meteorological software modeling to select the exact river of wind that will carry it there. A balloon has zero thrust. It is entirely at the mercy of the atmosphere. This is its primary strength, allowing complete silence and zero fuel consumption. But it is also its greatest vulnerability. If the wind shifts mid-flight, a lethal payload can easily be carried hundreds of kilometers off course, potentially drifting into neutral territory or civilian centers. To solve this, Ukraine employs rigorous pre-mission atmospheric modeling. Before any combat launch, meteorological teams deploy specialized radiosonde-equipped weather balloons to map the atmosphere up to 40 kilometers above the Earth. By calculating exactly how fast the balloon will ascend and at what altitude it will float, operators can predict its flight path across a range of 800 kilometers, which is around 497 miles. They choose the exact minute, location, and gas volume to ensure the balloon arrives precisely over the target corridor. But Russia has invested tens of billions of dollars into world-class air defense systems like the S-400 Panzer S-1 and Tor M2. Why are they repeatedly failing to intercept these slow plastic bags? Because these balloons occupy a radar, thermal, and electronic blind spot that modern air defenses were never designed to see. But here is the downside. If this high-altitude balloon strategy is so cheap and effective, why hasn't Ukraine completely abandoned conventional missiles and drones in favor of it? Because the weapon system is entirely unguided during transit, creating immense strategic, environmental, and diplomatic risks. No weapon system is perfect, and the stratospheric balloon has several glaring flaws. Total weather dependency. No matter how accurate the software modeling is, the weather remains probabilistic. If the jet stream shifts unexpectedly during an 8-hour flight, a balloon targeting an industrial complex can easily end up drifting directly over a civilian housing district. The risk of collateral damage. If a mechanical failure causes an unguided mortar bomb payload to be released early or late, it can strike schools, farms, or residential areas far away from any legitimate military objective, creating severe political fallout. There are 3 distinct reasons why Russian air defenses are blind to this threat. First, near-zero radar cross-section. Modern radar is built to detect metal. A latex or mylar balloon envelope at 15,000 meters is practically transparent to radar waves. The only metallic component is the tiny gondola box, giving it a radar cross-section smaller than a typical wild bird. Second, complete thermal and electronic silence. Conventional cruise missiles and drones emit immense heat from their engines and continuous radio signals for guidance. A drifting balloon emits absolutely nothing. There is no thermal plume for infrared sensors to track, and no radio frequency emission to intercept. Third, saturation overload. But Ukrainians never send these balloons alone. They launch them in massive swarms. Some carry live mortar shells, while others carry cheap metallic corner reflectors. These corner reflectors bounce radar energy directly back to the source, making a $50 plastic balloon look identical to a multi-million-dollar fighter jet on a radar screen. An S-300 air defense battery can only track around 65 targets simultaneously. By flooding the airspace with cheap decoys, Ukraine forces Russian operators into a catastrophic dilemma: fire a $1 million interceptor missile at a trash bag, or ignore it and risk a kamikaze drone destroying an oil refinery. Remember the Chinese spy balloon? It almost shot down the entire United States. The balloon itself was unarmed, but shooting it down was considered extremely dangerous, which is precisely why the US military waited until it had crossed the continental United States before taking action. They sent in the F-22 Raptor. The jet climbed to 58,000 feet to intercept the balloon, which was floating between 60,000 and 65,000 feet in the stratosphere. The F-22 fired a single AIM-9X Sidewinder, a short-range, heat-seeking air-to-air missile at a cost of around $400,000. Why use a missile instead of guns, which are less costly? Using the F-22's cannon was rejected for two reasons. First, the thin air at 58,000 feet makes a close-range gun run unstable and dangerous for the pilot. Second, the balloon's thin fabric wouldn't trigger the explosive shells. It would only cause a slow, unpredictable leak, while those unexploded bullets rained lethally down to Earth. This proves a single balloon can also prove a big headache for one of the superpowers. For more original videos, check out the links here.